The concrete didn't feel like a tragic ending. It just felt cold. I remember the taste of copper, the wail of sirens in the distance, and the sharp, careless sound of Damien's laugh echoing from the rooftop above. I had dulled my own mind for years, just to keep them warm, and they shoved me off the edge the second I stopped being useful. I closed my eyes, expecting the void. Instead, I woke up to the smell of cheap floor wax and the frantic scratching of a number 2 pencil. My lungs expanded with a violent, jagged gasp. I gripped the edge of the desk so hard my knuckles popped. The fluorescent lights above hummed a low, synthetic buzz. I wasn't dead on the pavement behind the science building. I was sitting in a molded plastic chair. My chest heaved, pulling in air that smelled of dry erase markers and someone's overpowering vanilla perfume, Chloe's perfume. I looked down. A test paper lay flat on the desk, a P Calculus B.C. midterm examination. My hands were shaking. I pressed them flat against the cold laminate to force them still. The date at the top right corner read October 14th, junior year. I closed my eyes, the memory of the fall still rushing through my inner ear like a physical weight. They had ruined me. Damien had used my research to win the National Science Stipend, and when the review board flagged the data as overlapping, he and Chloe pointed the finger at me. She stole it, they said. She's unstable. The school believed the kids whose parents funded the new athletics wing. My scholarships were revoked. My admissions rescinded. When I confronted them on the roof of the science building, Damien had pushed me. Just a warning shove. He'd probably tell the police later. But I lost my footing. Now I was here. 2 years prior, I stared at the paper. Problem 14. Evaluate the integral. In my previous life, I had looked at this exact question, known the answer was e to the x minus 1 plus c, and deliberately written down a flawed partial fraction decomposition. I had tanked this midterm. I had scored a 62, so that Damien's 88 would look like sheer genius on the curve, keeping him in the top percentile for the global scholar qualifier. I had spent my entire high school career rounding down my own intellect to survive the social food chain of Crestview High. If I was smart but submissive, they kept me around. If I was a threat, they destroyed me. I picked up the pencil. The yellow wood felt heavy, rough against my thumb. I looked up. Mr. Harrison was reading a paperback at his desk, oblivious. 2 rows ahead, Damien was chewing on his eraser, staring blankly at the back of Chloe's head. Chloe was carefully filling in a bubble, her perfectly manicured nails catching the awful overhead light. A cold, quiet clarity settled over me. The panic receded, leaving behind something hard and sharp in my chest. I flipped my test paper over. I found the pink pearl eraser in my pencil case and rubbed out the fake fumbling equations I had written just 5 minutes ago in a past life. I rubbed until the paper was almost raw, swept the gray shavings onto the floor. Then, I started to write. I didn't hold back. I moved through the remaining problems with lethal precision. Taylor series, polar curves, differential equations. I didn't just solve them. I used the most elegant, unassailable methods I knew. My pencil flew across the page, the lead snapping once, twice. I didn't care. I grabbed a pen and kept going. 5 minutes, Mr. Harrison called out, not looking up from his book. A collective groan rippled through the room. Damien leaned back, stretching his arms, a confident smirk on his face. He caught my eye and subtly tapped his chin, our silent signal. Did you make sure I'm covered? I stared at him, really looked at him. The expensive haircut, the arrogant slouch. He wasn't a god. He was just a boy who needed to steal the oxygen from the people around him, to breathe. I didn't nod. I broke eye contact, flipped to the front page, and wrote my name in dark, heavy letters, Harper. When the bell rang, a physical weight lifted off my shoulders. I gathered my things, dropping the test on Mr. Harrison's desk. He barely glanced at it. I stepped out into the hallway. The noise was immediate lockers, slamming sneakers, squeaking a chaotic symphony of teenagers moving to their next period. I leaned against the cool metal of a locker, taking a deep breath. Hey, Space Cadet. Chloe materialized beside me, Damien trailing a half step behind. She smelled like that cloying vanilla. You looked like you were sweating bullets in there, Chloe said, her voice dripping with that faux concern she weaponized so well. You didn't mess up the curve, did you? Damien needs this. Yeah, Harper. Damien chimed in, leaning against the locker next to mine, trapping me in their little circle. My dad will actually kill me if I drop below a 90 on the adjusted scale. You kept it under 70, right? In my past life, I would have ducked my head, smiled nervously, and assured them I had played my part perfectly. I would have felt a sick twist of shame in my gut, trading my dignity for their scraps of friendship. I looked at Damien, then at Chloe. I guess we'll see, I said. My voice didn't shake. It was flat, dead. Chloe's perfectly plucked eyebrows pulled together. She wasn't used to me speaking without an apology attached. What does that mean? It means Mr. Harrison will grade them, I said, stepping away from the locker, breaking their physical trap. Excuse me, I have to get to biology. I didn't look back as I walked down the hall, but I could feel their eyes burning into my spine. The fear wasn't entirely gone, but the rage was stronger. I wasn't going to hide anymore. Let them burn in the light. The fallout wasn't immediate. It took exactly 48 hours for the ecosystem of Crestview High to fracture. Friday morning, AP, calculus. The air in the room was thick with the usual post-exam dread. Mr. Harrison stood at the front, holding a stack of graded papers. He looked different today. Usually, he looked bored, perpetually exhausted by the mediocrity of his students. Today, he was frowning. He kept looking at the top paper in his hand, then looking up at the rows of desks. Before I passed these back, Mr. Harrison began his voice, cutting through the chatter. I want to talk about the curve. Damien sat up straighter in front of me, nudging Chloe's chair with his shoe. A smug ritual. Historically, I have curved this midterm based on the highest score in the room. Mr. Harrison continued. He took off his glasses and wiped them on his tie. Usually that score sits somewhere in the high 80s, sometimes low 90s. He put his glasses back on. His eyes found mine. Today, however, there is no curve. A murmur of confusion and outrage swept through the room. Chloe raised her hand, not waiting to be called on. Mr. Harrison, that's not fair. If the test was too hard, you always curve it. What was the highest grade? The test wasn't too hard, Chloe, Mr. Harrison said dryly. It was exactly as difficult as an AP exam. And there is no curve, because curving a perfect score of 100% would mathematically benefit no one but the person who achieved it. The room went dead silent. Damien whipped his head around to look at me, panic flaring in his eyes. He thought I had betrayed him. He thought I had scored an 85 or something, ruining his margin. He had no idea. Mr. Harrison walked down the aisles, dropping papers face down on the desks. He dropped an 82 on Chloe's desk, a 76 on Damien's. Then he stopped at my desk. He looked at me for a long moment. There was no warmth in his expression, just a clinical intense curiosity. He placed the paper face up. 100. A plus, written in sharp, red ink. Below it, a rare, hastily scribbled note. See me after class. I didn't flip the paper over. I'd left it there stark and red for the people behind me to see. When the bell rang, the explosion was immediate. 100, Chloe hissed, slamming her hands down on my desk before I could stand. Her face was flushed, the veneer of the sweet, popular girl completely shattered. You got a perfect score. Looks like it, I said, putting my pencils into my case one by one. You told me you were going to throw it. Damien snarled, crowding in next to her. His face was ugly when he was angry, red vein bulging in his neck. My dad is going to see a 76 Harper. Do you know what he's going to do? I don't remember telling you I'd throw it, I replied, zipping the case shut. I finally stood up, forcing them to step back or physically touch me. And frankly, Damien, your grade is a reflection of your own work. If you wanted an A, you should have studied. Chloe let out a short, incredulous laugh. Who do you think you're talking to? You're a charity case, Harper. The only reason people even look at you is because we let you sit at our table. Then I guess I'll find a new table. I hoisted my backpack over my shoulder and walked to the front of the room. Mr. Harrison was waiting. He watched the exchange, his face impassive, but his eyes tracked me as I approached his desk. The room had emptied out, leaving only the two of us. Harper, he said, tapping a pen against his desk. In the 2 years I've taught you, you've hovered comfortably at a B- average. You show minimal effort, you rarely participate, and your homework is aggressively mediocre. I've had a change of perspective, Mr. Harrison. A sudden intellectual awakening overnight. He raised an eyebrow. You solved problem 14, using a technique I haven't taught yet. A technique typically covered in college-level differential equations. I read ahead, I said smoothly. He stopped tapping the pen. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. The Global Scholar Qualifier exams are in 3 weeks. The school selects the top 3 students in the junior class to sit for it. The results dictate early admissions to Ivy League programs. The administration already had their 3 names picked out. Damien, Chloe, and Liam, I stated. It wasn't a guess. I lived it. Yes, Mr. Harrison leaned back. But a perfect score on this midterm disrupts their algorithm. If you keep this up, you'll displace someone. And people around here don't like being displaced. I'm not worried about other people anymore, Mr. Harrison. You should be. He picked up his book again, dismissing me. They'll think you cheated. They'll try to prove it. Don't slip up. I walked out of the classroom into the hallway. It was empty now, the stragglers, having hurried to their next period. I felt a strange, terrifying sense of freedom. I was a target now, but the difference was, this time, I wasn't standing on the edge of a roof, waiting to be pushed. I was building the ledge myself. Lunch was the true test. The cafeteria at Crestview was a rigid caste system. I bought a sad-looking turkey sandwich and turned towards the center of the room. Chloe and Damien were already there, holding court at the massive round table by the windows. As I approached, the conversation stopped. 6 pairs of eyes locked onto me. Chloe didn't say a word. She just moved her designer bag onto the empty chair beside her, my chair, a physical barricade. I didn't stop. I didn't hesitate. I walked right past their table, the silence stretching out behind me like a physical wake, and sat down at a small empty table near the vending machines. I took a bite of my sandwich. It tasted like cardboard. But as I chewed, watching Chloe glaring daggers at the back of my head from across the room, I smiled. They thought they were freezing me out. They didn't realize I was the one locking the door. By Tuesday, I was a ghost, or worse, a disease. The freeze-out was absolute. Nobody asked for my notes. Nobody bumped my shoulder in the halls. In a school like Crestview, where status was currency, dropping down a social tier was supposed to be a death sentence. But I found the silence exhilarating. I had so much free time. I didn't have to spend 3 hours a night doing Damien's history, outlines, embedding just enough minor errors, so it didn't look suspicious. I didn't have to draft Chloe's English essays. I used the time to study for the Global Scholar Qualifier. I hit the library every afternoon, tearing through advanced physics, historical geopolitics, and theoretical mathematics. My brain, suppressed for so long, absorbed the information like dry, earth-drinking rain. But Chloe wasn't the type to let a slight go unpunished. If she couldn't control me, she would destroy me. It started with whispers. I heard she had the answer key. I heard she slept with a TA. I heard she paid a college kid to take it for her. Standard boring high school vitriol. I ignored it. I aced a pop quiz in chemistry. I decimated a debate in AP government. The whispers turned into a low, continuous roar. Then came Thursday. I was in the library, deep into a textbook on macroeconomics, when the PA system crackled. Harper to the principal's office. Harper to the principal's office, immediately. I closed the textbook. The librarian gave me a sympathetic, nervous look. I slung my bag over my shoulder and made the long walk down the main corridor. The administration wing of Crestview was all mahogany and glass, designed to intimidate. When I walked into Principal Davis's office, I wasn't surprised by who was waiting. Principal Davis sat behind his massive desk, looking grave. Beside him was Mrs. Gable, the guidance counselor, and sitting in one of the plush visitor chairs, looking the picture of distressed innocence, was Chloe. "Have a seat, Harper," Principal Davis said, gesturing to the empty chair next to Chloe. I remained standing. I prefer to stand. "What is this about?" Davis frowned at my tone. "We have a serious issue regarding academic integrity." "Oh," I raised an eyebrow, looking down at Chloe. She wouldn't meet my eyes. She was staring at her hands, playing the victim perfectly. "Chloe has come forward with some very concerning allegations," Mrs. Gable said gently, using her carefully modulated counselor voice. "She claims that you confessed to obtaining an illicit copy of the AP Calculus midterm." I let out a harsh, abrupt laugh. It echoed in the quiet office. "I confessed to her when she said it happened in the locker room yesterday." Davis said, his tone hardening. "Harper, cheating is a zero-tolerance offense at Crestview. Given your sudden, miraculous improvement in grades, the administration finds this accusation highly credible." Credible, I tasted the word. My grades improve, so I must be a fraud. Has anyone bothered to ask Mr. Harrison? He graded the paper. He saw my work. "Mr. Harrison acknowledged that your work was highly irregular for your academic history," Davis countered. "He said you used methods you weren't taught." "Because I read a book." I snapped, my patience thinning. I looked at Chloe. "Look at me, Chloe." She flinched, but looked up, her eyes wide and watery. It was a good performance, almost Oscar-worthy. "You're lying," I said, my voice dropping to a deadly calm. "You know you're lying. You're doing this because you're terrified that my rank will edge you out of the top 3 for the qualifier." "Harper, that is enough." Principal Davis stood up. "You will not attack another student in my office. Chloe came to us out of moral obligation. Her moral obligation is to her own ego," I said, turning my gaze back to the principal. "You want proof that I didn't cheat? Fine. Test me." The room went quiet. "What?" Mrs. Gable asked. "Test me. Right here. Right now," I demanded, stepping closer to the desk. "Pull up a past AP exam. Pull up a college-level assessment. Give me any calculus problem you want. Give me 20. I'll solve them in front of you. If I miss even one, you can expel me." Principal Davis blinked. This was not the script. The accused was supposed to cry deny and eventually break. "This is highly irregular," Davis stammered. "So is accusing a student of cheating without a shred of physical evidence based solely on the word of a girl whose class rank is directly threatened by me." I shot back. "Call Mr. Harrison. Tell him to bring down the hardest variant of the midterm, the one he didn't use." Davis looked at Mrs. Gable. She gave a slight nod. He picked up his desk phone. 10 minutes later, Mr. Harrison walked in. He didn't look surprised. He looked like a man who was finally watching a fascinating experiment yield results. He held a single sheet of paper. "This is the C variant," Mr. Harrison said, placing it face down on the small coffee table in the center of the room. "I use it for makeup exams. It is demonstrably harder than the A variant you took last week." He handed me a pencil. I didn't sit in the chair. I knelt on the floor by the coffee table, a position of absolute submission that contrasted violently with the fury in my chest. I flipped the paper over. There were 5 complex problems. Multivariable calculus. The room was so silent, I could hear the hum of the air conditioner and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. I didn't look at any of them. I let the math take over. The beautiful, cold, unforgiving logic of numbers. There was no room for manipulation here. No room for Chloe's lies or Damien's entitlement. In mathematics, you are either right or you are wrong. I was right. I moved through the problems with aggressive speed. I didn't just write the answers. I documented every step of my logic, every derivation, every theorem applied. It took me 14 minutes. I stood up, dropped the pencil onto the paper, and stepped back. Mr. Harrison walked over. He picked up the paper. Davis, Gable, and Chloe watched him holding their breath. Harrison read the first problem, then the second. He flipped the page, checking my work on the back. A slow, genuine smile spread across his usually dour face. He looked at Principal Davis. Flawless. In fact, on problem 4, she found a shortcut that bypassed a standard 2-page derivation. Chloe made a small strangled noise in the back of her throat. "Are we done here?" I asked, looking directly at Principal Davis. The principal cleared his throat, looking highly uncomfortable. "Well, it appears there has been a misunderstanding." "It wasn't a misunderstanding," I said coldly. "It was an assassination attempt. If you want to talk about zero tolerance for academic dishonesty, I suggest you look into who really wrote Damien's AP history paper last month. Check the metadata on the Word document." I threw that grenade casually, knowing the explosion it would cause later. I picked up my bag. "See, Harper," Mrs. Gable said, looking a mix of stunned and apologetic. I didn't acknowledge her. I walked to the door, pulled it open, and looked back a last time. Chloe was staring at me, her face pale, the realization finally dawning on her. I wasn't her stepping stone anymore. I was the wall she was about to crash into. "I'll see you at the qualifier rankings, Chloe," I said. I let the heavy oak door click shut behind me. The grenade I rolled into Principal Davis's office took exactly 3 hours to detonate. I was sitting in AP European History when the door opened. A student aide stood there, holding a yellow slip of paper. He handed it to our teacher, Mr. Russo, who read it and immediately looked at the back of the room. "Damien," Mr. Russo said, his voice flat. "Principal's office, now." Damien had been leaning back in his chair, sketching something on his notebook margin. He froze. The arrogant slouch vanished, replaced by a rigid, sudden tension. He looked at Chloe, who sat 1 row over. She looked away, staring intensely at her open textbook. She already knew. She had been in the room when I set the trap. Damien grabbed his backpack and walked out. The heavy classroom door shut behind him. I kept my eyes on my notes, my pen moving steadily across the page, but I could feel the microscopic shift in the room's atmosphere. The king had just been summoned, and everyone smelled blood in the water. The metadata on a Word document is a beautiful, unforgiving thing. It tracks the original author, the creation date, the total editing time, and every machine the file has ever passed through. In my past life, I had written Damien's midterm paper on the socio-economic impacts of the Industrial Revolution on my battered laptop, saving it under my registered user, ID, before emailing it to him. He was too lazy to copy and paste the text into a new document. He just changed the name at the top, hit print, and turned it in. I spent the rest of the period outlining the fall of the Romanovs. It felt fitting. By the end of the school day, the rumor mill had evolved from a whisper to a scream. I walked out to the main courtyard, where the crisp October air usually cleared my head. Harper. I stopped. Damien was marching toward me, his face a terrifying shade of mottled purple. He was flanked by two guys from the lacrosse team, his usual muscle. But they hung back, sensing the raw, unhinged energy coming off him. "You snitched," he hissed, stopping inches from my face. He smelled like sour sweat and panic. "You told Davis about the paper." "I merely suggested they check the digital footprint," I said, my voice deliberately quiet. I didn't back up. I planted my feet on the concrete. "If it was your work, Damien, there wouldn't be a problem. Was there a problem? They gave me a 0. He slammed his hand against a nearby brick pillar. Several students turned to watch. "They put me on academic probation. Do you have any idea what my father is going to do? That paper was 30% of my grade. I'm out of the top 10. I'm out of the qualifier. Then you better start studying for the SATs," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "Because you'll actually have to take those yourself." He lunged. It wasn't a calculated move. It was the wild, pathetic flailing of a cornered animal. Before his hands could even grapple my jacket, a thick arm shot out and shoved him back hard. "Take a walk, Damien." I blinked. Standing between me and Damien was Nathan. Nathan sat in the back of my physics class. He was notoriously quiet, played no sports, and was universally ignored by the social elite of Crestview. He also had the highest natural GPA in the school, right behind the artificially inflated grades of Chloe and Damien. Damien stumbled back, looking at Nathan in shock. "Stay out of this, freak. You're embarrassing yourself," Nathan said, casually, adjusting his backpack strap. He was taller than Damien, broader in the shoulders. "And you're on probation. You throw a punch on school grounds right now. Davis will expel you before the blood dries. Walk away." Damien looked at me, then at Nathan, his chest heaving. The realization of his own powerlessness was dawn breaking over a ruin. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "You are dead. You hear me. You're a nobody." He turned and shoved his way through the gathering crowd, his lackeys trailing behind. The courtyard was dead silent. Everyone was staring at me. I didn't give them the satisfaction of a reaction. I just pulled my jacket tighter around me. "Thanks," I said, glancing at Nathan. He didn't smile. He just studied my face with an analytical intensity that made me feel entirely transparent. "I didn't do it for you. I just hate the noise." He paused, looking toward the brick pillar where Damien had stood. "You sandbagged for 2 years. Why?" "I was tired," I answered honestly. "And now I'm awake." Nathan finally gave a slow, measured nod. "Good. The preliminary list for the qualifier drops tomorrow morning. Let's see what you actually bring to the table." He walked away, blending into the sea of students. I watched him go, a strange sense of camaraderie settling in my chest. I wasn't entirely alone in the trenches. The preliminary list was pinned to the corkboard outside the main office at 7:30 a.m. on Friday. A crowd had already formed by the time I arrived. I stood on the periphery, watching the backs of their heads. The murmurs were frantic. I waited for the bell to ring, signaling first period. The crowd thinned out, reluctantly, scattering to their classes. I walked up to the board. The list was printed on heavy cream-colored cardstock. It ranked the top 50 juniors based on their newly recalculated, unweighted GPAs combined with teacher evaluations. The top 3 names were bolded. They were the ones going to the state capitol next month to sit for the Global Scholar Qualifier. 1. Harper 2. Nathan 3. Liam Chloe was number 4. Damien wasn't even on the page. I stared at my name. The ink was black and absolute. I ran a finger over the letters, feeling the slight indentation on the paper. For 2 years in my past life, I had watched Chloe and Damien gloat over this list while I sat in the mid-40s, suffocating my own potential. The vindication didn't feel like an explosion. It felt like a deep, slow breath of cold air. Enjoy it while it lasts. I turned. Chloe was standing at the end of the hall. Her makeup was flawless, her hair perfectly styled, but the muscles in her jaw were jumping. The mask was cracking. I said, my voice echoing slightly in the empty corridor. "You think you won," she said, taking a step closer. The sweet, cloying smell of vanilla preceded her. "You think because you tricked Harrison and Davis into putting your name on a piece of paper, you actually belong up there. Math isn't a trick, Chloe. It's an absolute. You either know it or you don't. You are nothing," she hissed, her voice venomous, dropping the good girl act entirely. "You don't have the money. You don't have the tutors. You don't have the connections. The qualifier is a brutal exam. It's designed to break people like you. You're going to choke. And when you do, everyone will know you were a fraud all along." "Are you done?" I asked, checking my watch. Because unlike you, I actually need to go to chemistry to maintain my grade. I walked past her. She didn't try to stop me. She was out of ammunition. The next 3 weeks were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Chloe and Damien couldn't touch me academically, so they tried to ruin me everywhere else. During gym class, my locker was jammed shut, forcing me to cut a lock with bolt cutters borrowed from the janitor. In the cafeteria, someone accidentally knocked a tray of hot soup onto my backpack. It ruined 2 of my notebooks. I spent 4 hours that night rewriting my physics notes from memory. They were trying to exhaust me. They wanted me frayed, paranoid, and sleep-deprived before the exam. It was a deeply human, ugly cruelty. There were days when the isolation felt heavy, like a physical weight pressing against my ribs. I would sit in my dark bedroom, staring at the ceiling, remembering the cold wind on the roof of the science building. I remembered how easy it would have been to just stay quiet, to just be the ghost they wanted me to be. But then, I would open my textbooks. I buried myself in the mechanics of the universe. I studied organic chemistry until I saw hexagonal carbon rings in my sleep. I read economic theory until the geopolitical movements of the 20th century played out in my head like a chess match. Knowledge was the one fortress they couldn't breach, and Nathan kept his distance, but he was always there, a silent sentinel on the edge of my vision. If Chloe's friends were lingering near my locker, Nathan would suddenly appear leaning against the adjacent wall, endlessly scrolling on his phone until they dispersed. We never spoke about it. It was an unspoken alliance, forged in the fire of academic exile. 3 days before the exam, I stayed late in the chemistry lab running titrations. The repetitive, precise motion of the stopcock, the sudden flash of pink in the flask, it was a grounding ritual. The door opened. Mr. Harrison walked in. He wasn't the chemistry teacher, but the teachers at Crestview all knew what was happening. "Harper," he said, leaning against the black slate lab table. "Mr. Harrison." I logged my final volume in my notebook and capped the burette. "The administration is nervous," he said quietly. "Usually they send students who have been prepped by elite admission consultants since they were 12. You are a wild card. They are terrified you're going to embarrass the school on a global stage." "I don't represent Crestview," I said, wiping down my station with a wet paper towel. "I represent myself." Harrison smiled, a rare, genuine expression. "I told Davis you'd say something like that. I just wanted to tell you. I've been teaching for 20 years. I have never seen a mind correct its own trajectory as violently as yours has. Do not let them pull you back down." "I won't." "Good." He tapped the table twice and walked out. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the fume hood. The girl, looking back, was tired. She had dark circles under her eyes and a small burn on her hand from a hot plate. But her eyes were sharp. She wasn't hiding anymore. The State Capitol Testing Center was a massive, brutalist concrete structure. It felt more like a bunker than an academic institution. Saturday morning, 7 a.m. The sky was the color of slate threatening rain. I stood on the wide concrete steps, clutching a plastic bag with 3 number 2 pencils, a black pen, and my student ID. No phones, no calculators, no smartwatches allowed. Around me, hundreds of students milled about. These were the elite, the prodigies. They wore tailored blazers and carried themselves with the terrifying confidence of generational wealth and Ivy League legacies. I spotted Chloe standing with a group of girls from a rival private school. She had managed to secure a spot through an alternate appeals process, a polite way of saying her father made a massive donation to the state education board. Damien was nowhere to be seen. He was a ghost of the past. Chloe saw me. She whispered something to the girls next to her, and they all turned to look at me, their faces twisted in identical polite sneers. I looked right through them. I found Nathan standing near the heavy glass doors, his headphones around his neck, looking intensely bored. I walked over and stood beside him. "Nervous?" he asked, not looking at me. "No," I said. It was the truth. The fear had burned out of me weeks ago. I just want to get this over with so I can sleep." The heavy doors clicked, unlocked. A man with a clipboard stepped out. "Proctors are ready. Find your assigned testing rooms. No talking from this point forward." The Global Scholar Qualifier was designed to be a nightmare. It wasn't just a test of knowledge. It was a stress test of the human mind. 8 hours, 4 sections, advanced logic, quantitative reasoning, geopolitical strategy, and theoretical sciences. My assigned room was a cavernous lecture hall. The desks were spaced 6 feet apart. I found my seat, row J, seat 14. The proctor, an older woman with sharp eyes, read the instructions in a monotone voice. She broke the seal on the exam booklets. The sound of paper tearing echoed in the silent room like a gunshot. She walked down the aisles, placing a thick, sealed booklet face down on my desk. "You may begin." I flipped the booklet over. The rest of the world ceased to exist. The concrete bunker, the sneering elites, the memory of a cold rooftop they all dissolved, replaced by the pure, unadulterated architecture of the exam. The quantitative section was brutal. It required applying multivariable calculus to economic supply chain disruptions. I didn't hesitate. I saw the patterns immediately, the numbers cascading in my mind like a waterfall of absolute truth. My pencil scratched furiously across the page. The geopolitical section presented a hypothetical scenario involving resource scarcity in the South China Sea. We had to draft a policy response utilizing historical precedent. I ripped through it, tearing apart the superficial arguments and digging into the grim, pragmatic realities of international trade law. Hours bled into one another. The air in the room grew heavy with the collective stress of 100 panicked teenagers. I heard someone 2 rows behind me, quietly hyperventilating. I heard the snap of pencils breaking. I didn't stop. I was a machine, built for this exact purpose. I poured every ounce of rage, every moment of isolation, every silent tear I had ever shed in my past life onto those pages. "Pencils down," the proctor called out. I stopped writing. The final sentence of my theoretical physics essay ended in a sharp, definitive period. I placed the pencil on the desk. My hand was cramping so badly my fingers were locked in a claw. I had a pounding headache right behind my eyes, but my chest felt light, so incredibly light. I walked out of the testing center into the freezing rain. Nathan was already outside, pulling his hood up. We didn't say a word about the test. We just walked to the train station together, in silence, the quiet understanding of soldiers who had survived the siege. The waiting was supposed to be the hardest part. The global results took a full month to process, as essays had to be blind graded by a panel of university professors in Geneva. For a month, Crestview High held its breath. Chloe paraded around the school, loudly discussing the nuances of the exam and how well she felt she handled the logic section. I ignored her. I went back to my books. I let the days blur. Then came December 1st. The school day started normally. I was in homeroom, staring out the window at the frost on the glass. The PA system clicked on. It wasn't the usual morning announcements. It was Principal Davis. His voice sounded strained, entirely devoid of his usual authoritative boom. It sounded like he had lost his breath. "May I have your attention, please? Teachers, please, halt all instruction." The room went dead silent. "We have just received the official verified results from the Global Scholar Qualifier Board in Geneva," Davis said. The static on the line popped loudly. "These results rank the top 1% of high school scholars internationally, across 32 countries." He paused. It was a long, agonizing pause. "It is my absolute honor to announce that Crestview High has produced a student on this list." A collective murmur started to rise in the classroom. People began looking at Chloe, who sat up straight, a triumphant, blinding smile breaking across her face. She smoothed her skirt, ready to stand up. "Not only did this student place on the list," Davis continued, his voice trembling slightly now, "but they have secured the highest aggregate score in the history of the examination." Chloe practically vibrated out of her seat. "Ranking number 1, globally," Davis said. I didn't move. I kept my eyes on the frost on the window pane. "Congratulations to Harper." The silence that hit the school was not the absence of noise. It was a physical vacuum. It was the sound of a paradigm shattering. I slowly turned my head from the window. Chloe was frozen, half standing, her triumphant smile decaying into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. Her eyes darted to me wide, bloodshot, and completely broken. She couldn't process it. Her reality, a reality built on my subjugation, had just been vaporized. The homeroom teacher dropped his coffee mug. It shattered on the linoleum, a loud crash that finally broke the spell. I looked at Chloe, at her trembling hands and pale face. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just picked up my pen, turned back to my notebook, and began to write. The game was over, and I had the whole world in front of me. The dark roast coffee from the teacher's shattered mug bled across the linoleum, seeping into the grout lines like a slow-moving fault line. No one moved to clean it up. No one breathed. 30 pairs of eyes bounced frantically between the intercom speaker on the wall, my impassive face, and the catastrophic collapse of Chloe sitting 3 desks away. She looked like a porcelain doll, dropped from a great height. Her mouth moved, forming words without sound. The meticulously constructed hierarchy of Crestview High, the one that dictated who was allowed to breathe and who was meant to drown, had just been obliterated by a single PA announcement. Number 1, globally. Harper, the teacher, finally stammered, abandoning his ruined mug. He looked at me with a bizarre mix of awe and terror. The principal's office. They'll want you down there. I closed my notebook. The snap of the cardboard cover sounded like a gavel. I stood up, slinging my backpack over my shoulder. As I walked down the aisle, the students physically recoiled, pulling their knees in, flattening themselves against their desks to let me pass. I was no longer the charity case. I was radioactive. When I reached Chloe's row, I stopped. She stared up at me, her eyes bloodshot mascara flaking at the corners. The sheer, naked panic in her expression was visceral. She had spent years telling herself I was beneath her, building her entire self-worth on the foundation of my suppressed intellect. Now the foundation was gone, and she was in free fall. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. I just looked down at her for 2 long, agonizing seconds, letting the silence crush her, before turning my back and walking out the door. The main office was a circus. As I pushed through the heavy glass doors, the flash of a camera blinded me. 2 local news reporters were already standing in the lobby, corralled by a frantic secretary. Principal Davis stood in the center of the room, sweating profusely through his expensive suit, talking animatedly to a man I recognized as the district superintendent. When Davis saw me, his face stretched into a painfully artificial smile. It was the smile of a man who realized the student he tried to bury was now the only thing keeping him employed. "Harper," he boomed, spreading his arms as if to embrace me. I stopped walking, forcing him to drop his hands awkwardly. "My God. History. You've made history. The superintendent is here. The press." "No," I said. The word dropped like an anvil. The bustling office ground to an abrupt halt. The secretary stopped typing. "Excuse me." Davis blinked, a bead of sweat tracing down his temple. "No press, no photos, no interviews with my name attached to this school." I said, my voice completely level. I looked at the superintendent. "Hello, Dr. Aris. I assume Principal Davis told you about his attempt to expel me for academic dishonesty a month ago. Based on 0 evidence, Dr. Aris's smile vanished. He turned a slow, lethal glare toward Davis. "He did not. It was a misunderstanding." Davis sputtered, his face draining of color. "A procedural error. We cleared it up immediately." "You cleared it up because I forced Mr. Harrison to give me a college-level exam on the floor of your office." I corrected, enjoying the cold, clinical precision of the truth. "You were perfectly willing to ruin my life to protect a legacy student who bought his grades. You don't get to parade me in front of the cameras now to pretend Crestview is a cradle of meritocracy." "Harper, be reasonable," Davis hissed, lowering his voice, desperation leaking out of him. "This is a monumental achievement for the district. The funding this could secure, the funding will go to a new athletic turf, while the chemistry lab continues to use Bunsen burners from the 1990s. I replied, "Here are my terms. You will release a brief written statement confirming a Crestview student achieved the score. You will not use my name in the press release. If you try to force a photo op, I will personally email the Global Scholar Ethics Board in Geneva and detail exactly how Damien's AP history paper was plagiarized, complete with the digital metadata and how this administration covered it up." Davis looked like he had been struck by a baseball bat. He opened his mouth, closed it, and looked at Dr. Eris for salvation. Eris was staring at me, evaluating the threat. He saw the absolute lack of bluff in my eyes. "Agree to her terms, Davis," the superintendent said coldly. "Do not push this." I turned around and walked out of the office. The reporters were shouting questions at my back, but the heavy glass doors shut them out. I stood in the empty hallway, the adrenaline slowly receding, leaving behind a profound sense of quiet. I had just taken a hostage, and the hostage was the reputation of the entire school. A slow clap echoed down the corridor. Nathan stepped out from the shadow of the trophy cases. He was leaning against the wall, a rare, genuine smirk playing on his lips. "Extortion," he observed, pushing off the wall and walking toward me. "I expected you to gloat. I didn't expect you to neuter the principal in front of his boss." "I work with the variables I'm given," I said, the tension bleeding out of my shoulders. "Number one," he shook his head slowly, "I placed 14th globally. I thought I was untouchable. 14th is Ivy League early admission," I pointed out. "Number one is picking the Ivy League you want and telling them to pay your rent," he countered. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crushed bag of vending machine pretzels, offering me one. It was the most normal human gesture I had experienced all morning. I took a pretzel. It was stale. It tasted like absolute victory. The offers didn't arrive by mail. They arrived by phone calls, to the school board encrypted emails, in black cars, pulling up to the Crestview curb. By the second week of December, my reality had fractured entirely from the rest of the student body. I was technically still enrolled as a junior, but I stopped attending most of my classes. Instead, I spent my days in the back room of the library, taking Zoom calls with admissions, deans from MIT, Oxford, and Caltech. They didn't want me to finish high school. They wanted me on their campuses for the spring semester. I was a statistical anomaly, a mind that had broken the upper limit of their predictive models, and they were treating me like a sovereign nation. Crestview was a ghost town to me now. The bullying had stopped completely. You don't bully a hurricane. You just hide and hope it doesn't tear the roof off your house. I was packing up my laptop after a brutal 2-hour interview with a physics department head at Stanford when the library door creaked open. I didn't look up, assuming it was the librarian. "I'm heading out, Mrs. Gable." "It's not Mrs. Gable." I froze. I knew that voice. It was hollowed out, missing its usual arrogant timbre. But it was him. Damien stood in the doorway. He looked terrible. The expensive haircut was grown out and messy. He wore a rumpled hoodie instead of his usual tailored jacket. His academic probation had destroyed his social standing, and the sheer gravity of my success had pulled his remaining sycophants away. He was a king without a court. I closed my laptop slowly. "You shouldn't be in here, Damien. This room is reserved." He took a step forward, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He looked around the small room at the stacks of university brochures and recruitment letters scattered across the table. His eyes locked onto a thick, embossed folder from Harvard. A physical flinch rippled through his body. My dad cut off my credit cards, Damien said, his voice tight. He found out about the history paper. He found out I'm not going to the qualifier. He told me I was an embarrassment. I stared at him. The cold apathy in my chest didn't waver. Why are you telling me this? He looked at me, and for a second, I saw a flash of the old Damien, the manipulative calculating boy, who knew exactly how to play on my sympathies in my past life. Because we used to be friends. Harper, he said, stepping closer, his voice adopting a pleading, desperate tone. Before all this, we were a team. I know I messed up. I know I pushed you too hard. But you won okay. You proved your point. Everyone knows you're the smartest person in the room. He reached out, resting a trembling hand on the edge of the table. I need you to tutor me, he whispered. I need you to help me get my grades back up before regular admissions. If you go to Davis and tell him I've turned a corner, if you co-sign for me, they'll listen to you. You're a god to them right now. I looked at his hand on the table. Then I looked at his face. He really believed it. He genuinely thought that after throwing me to the wolves, after driving me to the literal edge of a roof in a timeline, he couldn't even remember. He could just ask for a favor. We were never friends, Damien, I said. My voice was dangerously soft. He blinked, taken aback. Harper, come on. We were a parasite and a host. I interrupted, standing up. I was shorter than him, but he shrank back instinctively. You didn't push me too hard. You actively suffocated me. You and Chloe used my brain as a resource, and the second I stopped being convenient, you tried to destroy me. I didn't want to, he protested, his voice cracking. Chloe made me. Stop. I held up a hand. Do not blame her for your own cowardice. You loved having me beneath you. You loved the power. I grabbed my backpack and slid my laptop inside. You want to know the difference between us, Damien? I asked, looking him dead in the eye. If you take away my money, my school, and my social standing, I still have my mind. I can rebuild anywhere. If you take away your father's checkbook, you are absolutely nothing. There is a void where your substance should be. Tears welled in his eyes, real, pathetic tears of a boy facing his own mediocrity. Please, Harper, I have nowhere else to go. Then I guess you'll have to get used to the void. I walked past him. He didn't try to stop me. I left him standing in the quiet library, surrounded by the physical proof of the world he was never going to touch. As I walked down the hall, I saw Nathan leaning against his locker. He took one look at my face and shoved his books into his bag. Stanford, he asked, as I fell into step beside him. MIT, I corrected. They offered me a spot in their advanced quantum mechanics research group starting in January. Nathan stopped walking. He stared at me, his analytical mind doing the math. January, as in 3 weeks from now. You're not finishing junior year. I'm not finishing high school, I said, a smile finally breaking across my face. It felt foreign, pulling at the corners of my mouth, but it felt right. I'm achieving escape velocity. Nathan nodded slowly. I got a letter from Caltech yesterday. Full ride. Early entry for the fall. Looks like we both make it out, I said. He held out a hand. Not a high five, not a fist bump. A formal adult handshake. I took it. His grip was firm. See you in the atmosphere, Harper. My last day at Crestview High was a Tuesday. It was anticlimactic by design. No assemblies, no tearful goodbyes. I just had to clean out my locker and hand in my textbooks to the front office. The winter air outside was sharp and biting, the kind of cold that clears your lungs and wakes you up. The hallways were mostly empty. The student body locked away in second period. I spun the combination dial on my locker for the last time. 143208. The metal door popped open. I started pulling out my notebooks, dumping them into a heavy canvas tote bag. Leaving already. I didn't flinch. I just closed my eyes for a fraction of a second, sighing internally. It was inevitable. The final boss battle in the crumbling ruins of the high school hierarchy. I turned around. Chloe was standing 10 feet away. She looked a decade older than she had 2 months ago. The flawless facade was completely gone. She was wearing sweatpants, something Chloe from September would have rather died than be caught in. Her hair was pulled back in a messy knot. The aura of untouchable superiority had been replaced by a bitter, hollowed-out exhaustion. "Just clearing out my things," I said neutrally. "MIT. She spat the acronym like it was a curse word. "That's the rumor. You're dropping out to go to MIT. "It's not a rumor." I tossed my AP chemistry textbook into the bag. It hit the bottom with a heavy thud. Chloe took a shaky step forward. Her hands were balled into fists at her sides. "You ruined my life." The accusation hung in the empty hallway, bouncing off the linoleum floors and metal lockers. It was the battle cry of the narcissist. I leaned against my open locker, crossing my arms. "Did I? You know you did," she screamed, her voice cracking, echoing violently. "I was number 1. I was going to Princeton. My father had the alumni connections. My grades were perfect. Everything was set. And you stepped out of the background and destroyed it." She was crying, now angry, humiliated tears streaming down her face. "They won't even look at my application now," she sobbed. "The school board reviewed my entire transcript after your little stunt in the principal's office. They flagged 3 of my AP classes for grading inconsistencies. My GPA dropped. My dad won't even look at me." She pointed a shaking finger at my chest. "You stole my future because you were jealous, because you couldn't handle that we were better than you." I listened to her entire tirade. I didn't interrupt. I let her bleed out her delusions until she was gasping for air, staring at me with a mixture of hatred and desperate, agonizing vulnerability. She wanted me to yell back. She wanted a fight. She wanted proof that she mattered enough to make me angry. I felt nothing. The rage that had fueled me through the calculus midterm, through the library study sessions, through the brutal 8 hours of the qualifier, it was gone. You can't be angry at a ghost. "I didn't steal your future, Chloe," I said quietly. The calmness of my voice seemed to hit her harder than a shout. "I just stopped writing it for you." She flinched. "You were never number 1. I continued my words, methodical and cold. "You were an illusion, propped up by my silence. The second I stopped doing your homework, the second I stopped deliberately failing to make you look smart, the illusion collapsed. You're a sociopath," she whispered, shaking her head. "No." I picked up my canvas bag, the heavy weight of the books grounding me. "I'm just the reality you couldn't afford to buy." I slammed my locker shut. The metallic crash made her jump. "Have a good life, Chloe. Try reading a book sometime. It helps." I turned my back on her and walked down the hall. I didn't run. I didn't look over my shoulder. I could hear her sobbing behind me, a ragged, pathetic sound that faded as I pushed through the heavy double doors of the main entrance. The cold December wind hit me in the face, biting at my cheeks. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the freezing air. It tasted like absolute, untethered freedom. I walked down the concrete steps, my boots crunching on the salt, laid down for the ice. As I reached the edge of the campus, I stopped. I turned around and looked up. There it was, the science building. 4 stories of red brick and glass. My eyes traced the fire escape up to the flat, gravel-lined edge of the roof. The exact spot where in another lifetime my story had ended in terror and a sickening plunge to the pavement. I stared at the edge for a long time. I waited for the phantom taste of copper, for the echo of Damien's laugh, for the crushing weight of the void. Nothing came. It was just a building full of small people playing small games, and I was no longer a piece on their board. I adjusted the strap of my bag on my shoulder, turned my back to Crestview High, and walked toward the train station. I had a quantum mechanics syllabus to read, and a whole universe waiting to be decoded. We all have that moment where we have to choose between keeping the peace or stepping into our own power. Harper's journey wasn't just about outsmarting the bullies. It was about the brutal, beautiful realization that you cannot let the fear of someone else's fragility dictate your greatness. The void only wins if you jump. If Harper's cold, calculated destruction of the Crestview elite gave you chills, smash that like button, share this video with someone who needs a reminder to stop shrinking themselves, and subscribe to the channel for more deeply satisfying revenge stories. Now, I want to hear from you in the comments. What's the hardest thing you've ever had to walk away from to protect your own potential? Drop your stories below, and I'll see you in the next one.